What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel, and we're talking about Blood on the Clocktower, but specifically homebrew character design. For a living, I make board games, and as a hobby, I dabble in creating funky Clocktower characters, as well as playing the game and running a lot of games with my regular group. And in one of the videos we did recently, somebody asked if I could go through all of the homebrew characters and stuff that I've made, and I would love to do that, but I actually have lost the data for pretty much everything from the beginning of this year and before. So I really only have anything from Temple of Rot onwards. And it also, for me, it's more fun to just create new stuff going forward. So this is what this video is going to be. It's going to be talking about how we create different characters, what makes up the different character types, and what kind of unexplored design space there is, which might give you some ideas and stuff to build, might give me some ideas and stuff to build. But let's get started with Townsfolk. So I've split Townsfolk into two categories. Category one is Townsfolk information, and I've kind of just written like a 1 or 2 word brief descriptor of what the different categories are, and I'll give some examples of characters as I go through them. For example, an alignment information Townsfolk would be the village idiot. The village idiot will choose a player and they will learn what their alignment is. That is an alignment type of character. We then have category. So for example, this is something that checks if a player is a particular type. Like for example, the investigator or the librarian all search for a specific category of character. A sobriety check. We have the acrobat is possibly the best sobriety check character. We have steps, which is the clockmaker. Wakes, I believe the only one is the chambermaid. Advice, you're looking at fisherman, you're looking at savant. Character, which is like if someone is looking for a specific character, or something like the dreamer that receives a specific character when they check people. And confirmation. So confirmation is a more complicated one, but I would put something like the virgin in this category, where like the only thing that it does is say that, hello, yes, I am a townsfolk. And so these are some of the types of information that you can have. I'm trying to think if I've created any characters that do stuff kind of beyond these 8 categories, because there is other stuff that you can measure within the game, like actions people have taken. The Yagabab was kind of a good example. Like the Mesepheles, you could argue that like if somebody has said a specific word, that the Mesepheles measures that. And so you're kind of trying to look, it doesn't necessarily have to be outside of these categories, but if it is not in one of these categories, there's a good chance it doesn't exist already. You're trying to create a character that just doesn't have something else that already does the same job but better. And also you're trying to make something that's not just does the same job but more complicated, which is what I see a lot of people do usually when they come and approach homebrew characters. The information for Townsfolk has to be simple enough that someone can kind of be able to solve with the information. One of the characters I created was the Dowser, which is, it functions like an empath, where you're checking that pairs of neighbors are like what their alignment is, but the Dowser would select a player and learn about their neighbors and their alignments instead of just their own, and they could pick themselves if they wanted one night of empath information. And so that was like, okay, what if it's the empath but it reads other things, right? And sometimes you can do that kind of thing. I had a character which was the physicist, which split the players into odd and even seats, and you learn how many evil players are on which parity, which is something that doesn't exist in the game currently, and that was one of the suggested fixes for the Skinkulus, where it was just be checking for parity, and if you only killed players on a specific parity, they would become evil. Obviously a thing that didn't happen. But you are trying to look at ways of measuring the game, the characters, the players, and things like that. The artist is a really good place to find inspiration for new information. Townsfolk, because some people ask you a question and be like, what is this thing? And then you go, wait, what if that was just a character? And that can sometimes be helpful. But I think people very rarely design Townsfolk information characters because there is like a pretty limited number of things you can measure, and it has like the least amount of inspiration. A lot of times when I'm creating Townsfolk characters, I'm creating interaction characters. Now let's talk about some of the interaction characters. First of all, we've got Victory. This is like the mayor. It has something that says you win the game written on it. We have Protector. That could be the monk, which stops people from dying at night. That could be the tea lady, which stops people dying if they're next to you. Evil drunk. So we are talking about the sailor, for example, which could drunk evil place and kill him. So about the courtier is a good example. Voting. So like the banshee, which gets extra nominations, extra votes if they successfully die. Evil misinformation. This is the magician. This is the poppygrower, which stops the evil team from learning something correctly. So that their team cohesion is affected slightly. I really don't think there's much more that you could explore within the evil misinformation space without being way too detriment. Because I feel like the magician and the poppygrower already are very, very strong with what they do. Because if evil players aren't paying much attention, they just kind of automatically lose the game, which is a bit brutal. And then character mix. So character mix can be something like the huntsman, which turns a damsel into a townsfolk. It can be something like the philosopher, which makes a different townsfolk, stuff like that. And so a lot of these interaction ones are usually seen as protectors. Usually they go way higher on the night sheet and they're doing stuff before the evil team. And this is where you see a lot of people kind of making characters and stuff like that. I think there is more space for like things that can be done, but also like finding different ways for a player to be interacted with. We've seen stuff like this state means this new effect happens to you. So like if you are poisoned, this is a new thing that you do now, or information changes because you exist. Like a recluse is a good example for that, but like negatively. So it's like if you are seeing an information, the information becomes better. For example, like player selecting you can only be sober. So like if a fortune teller picks you, then the other person they pick, it's technically always going to be sober information, for example. There's like a lot of different ways to make the different characters interact with that, necessarily specifically being information characters. But I also think when people are designing for this game, they are much more likely to create evil characters. And now there is possibly a reason for that, and that's probably because there is so many townsfolk and outsiders already, and that people are more excited to jump in and make minions and demons. But let's talk about outsiders before we get into the evil team. Outsiders, again, have 8 categories as best I can guess. We've got failure. That means lose the game. We're talking about a damsel being guessed. We're talking about a klutz picking an evil player. Voting. This is like the butler or the zealot. Grenade. Grenade is a category where when you die, something bad happens. That is a grenade character. The something bad happens can be something from any of the other categories, but it's a specific type of how you have to interact with something that I think makes its own category. And also, all these categories are like not exclusive. Nothing fits into only one category. It can do parts of both. Like you could have a hybrid chambermaid character, which is like if you pick a player and they work tonight, you wake with them, or something like that, right? Which like checks for part of one thing and then has an interaction or has an information piece that's like separate and different from that and then works together. We have madness. So mutant is the easiest example here, where they must be mad about something. One of my characters that I use almost all the time is the imitator, which is taking what the pixie does, but creating an outsider version of it and making them mad with more of a downside rather than the pixie who's mad with an upside. And you can very easily do that with a lot of townsfolk. You take a townsfolk that has an upside, and then you reword it so that it is more of a downside, and then it becomes an outsider. We had a World Cup script that was like that, where it's like, this is just the amnesiac is an outsider, and then as a storyteller, you give them ability, which is a detriment, but they have to figure it out through the course of the game, which is more stressful. And like that's a really easy way to twist an existing character to fit into a different category. We've then got character mix. So this is like the Hatter. When the Hatter dies, the evil team picks new characters to be. That's going to be a detriment. That is an outsider. Misinformation. That's the drunk. Probably the easiest one there. Or the recluse. Unaware is a funky category for this one. So we're talking lunatic, we're talking drunk. You don't know that you are an outsider. You are something else worse. And then alignment switch. So alignment switch is like the politician, but like could also inherently, just because the Fangu exists, be all of the outsiders. You can create evil characters that add these kinds of conditions to other types of characters. For example, you can turn townsfolk into grenade type things if the demon does something when it kills them. And mixing and matching these types of interactions is how it works. You can have madness minions, for example. We have the Serenovus, and the Serenovus basically simulates a mutant on another player, but the character might change based on Serenovus' choice. So that's, here's some of the design space being outlined for you, so you can get an idea of how the good team characters, have a cohesion. But how characters aren't specifically locked into that category, you could change the slight thing about it to make it a positive or a negative, and then find how detrimental it's going to be to the good team, and then find a category for it to fit based on that. So let's talk about minions. Minions, I managed to find a secret 9th category, which is wizard, and we'll come to that last. But starting with victory, so victory is you win the game if, like the goblin is probably an easy example there. If you successfully convince everyone that you should still be executed after being, claiming the goblin, you win the game. There's not that many win the game characters like the fearmonger, but usually the evil team strays away from such a thing unless if it's like really televised, really communicated to the players in some way. Like the fearmonger goes, "Hello, I am the fearmonger, I exist." The goblin has to say that they are the goblin first. And so victory conditions on minions need to be something that you can visibly see and happen. I created a character recently in the last couple of sets that we saw called Signature, where if 4 dead good players have no dead good neighbors, Signature wins the game. And looking at the Grimoire, you can always see where the dead players are, and then you have to be guessing whether or not they have at least one of them has a dead good neighbor. If you have 2 dead good players next to each other, Signature's ability goes away. So you can see visibly what's happening and whether or not that victory condition is going to activate. Adjust mix. So adjust mix is the Baron, is the Godfather, and the Godfather is adjust mix plus killer, right? So the Baron is just adjust mix, and then they make a more complicated version by adding another category to it, which is another good example of something. Taking like a basic trouble brewing character and going, okay, what if we added this other category to it and made it like slightly more complicated to accomplish this goal? Hide evil. The spy is maybe the best option because itself can register as a good player. We could also argue the Boffin is hide evil based on it giving the demon a really good bluff where they're actually going to have information and doing stuff and be able to interact with the game. Killer is, let's say, Boom Dandy. It blows up, it kills lots of people. Pretty straightforward. Convert, that is the Mephistopheles, where it will make an evil player if they say the word. Misinformation, that's Poisoner. That's, I would argue, Serenovus. There should maybe be another category, which is like misinformation and then in brackets noise, because spending time talking about something that is not relevant to the narrative or solving who the demon is noise, and but is also misinformation. I'll get back to that when we talk about the wizard. Vote mix. Vote mix can be something like the Vizier, which forces an execution through, so the votes don't matter for sometimes. It can also be something like, I'm blanking, the Organ Grinder. Thanks, Brain. The Organ Grinder, because you can't see how many votes there are. And I would argue also the Witch is kind of like that, except it's more like a nomination mix, where there are certain players, such as myself, you're much less likely to nominate if a Witch is present on a script. And then we have character mix, which is like the Pit Hack, where the Pit Hack can change any player's character to be something more detrimental or more positive for the evil team or something like that. And then the Wizard, which can do whatever the fuck that it wants, but the main thing that the Wizard does is it creates noise. It makes people fearful that something weird has happened, and it's usually so far beyond being able to be solved that it makes it difficult to actually, spend the time processing and solving the information for the game. The Wizard is a goofy character. I believe it has its own category for a good reason. But here is some ideas as to what things minions can do. And I think the Signature is actually a good example because it plays into the rules of victory really, really well. It is a very visible thing that you can see as your distance to whether or not Signature has activated. And then it's up to you to trust whether or not you have 2 dead good players. And figure that out. You can have other stuff, like I'm trying to think of characters I've created before. I've had a bunch of killer minions. We had the Noon Sayer, which made the nominee and the nominator Rochambeau, and the loser dies. But then the Noon Sayer always wins Rochambeau. And the first time our group played that, we had 6 people die on the first day, and it was a 2-day game because people didn't understand how insanely powerful this character was. They also didn't understand that you could just intentionally tie in Rochambeau, a very easy thing to do, which was kind of funny. And so normally putting a limit on a killer character, like the psychopath can only activate once, but then the psychopath is like very public. The Noonsayer wasn't super public, and it wouldn't have to itself interact with other players to get people killed. And so I would argue the Noonsayer is a bad character. It's like way too powerful. It needed to be reined in from what it did. And like that's when mentioning against the power level, usually you can check the maths of something. For example, the assassin kills one person once per game, and it gets a nice upside if it can kill something that is being protected, but you don't know in advance if someone's being protected. It's not like each night asterisk, choose a player, find out if they can die tonight or not. If yes, you may choose to kill them, right? It's just like, that guy, but like it never misses. And so it's interesting that like that is a niche upside, but that's like a really specific Batman Rising solution. Whereas if it was like you choose a player and if they meet a specific criteria, they die, like works much better. Or like for a minion to make an extra kill, it needs to either be a really big game or a way that you can control that in such a way. With a lot of other stuff like vote mix, we had a Wizard Wish, which meant that the player each day that got the least amount of votes was the one that would be executed, and it took us a long time to figure it out, but we had a tie because we had the two lowest people were 4 votes, and we didn't have anyone with less than that, so we had a tie. Even though we like voted really hard and we put someone else up on 8 or something after that, it was a tie. And so little things like that, unless if it's like super communicated, it can get really confusing and really hard to figure out. But I feel like hidden minions are often hide, evil, or misinformation type. A lot of the other types are noisy or leave a trail and are solvable by the good team. And having noisy minions can often do a good job of distracting from the demon, which is kind of their job, right? So you want to make sure that the minion doesn't step into the demon's territory too much. The assassin's job is to kill a player the demon cannot. And that's why there isn't very many killer minions. The Godfather gets to kill people because there's a trail. You can see, an outsider was executed today, and therefore the Godfather acted. So, something to think about. Now, let's go to our last category. Let's talk about demons. I think demons are much harder to categorize because they are all very similar. They must uphold the maths of killing one player at night, for the most part. And sometimes they are allowed to kill more than that. And the only one not in this list is the Zombull, but that's basically like I just hide the best. I guess you could argue that's misinfo because you think it's dead and it's not. But you're trying to maintain a kill pattern, which is normally just each night asterisk, choose a player, they die, and then you're trying to tack a thing onto that, which adds a layer of complexity. For example, I had Deadweight, which was players that you kill at night are told privately that they have died, but are not announced as dead. And so players have to go, okay, people are claiming this thing happening. Is this the minions effect that's creating the announcement, or is it the demon's effect? And that is a misinfo character in a way. And then it's still just killing one person each night. That's the thing that it does, right? And so you're trying to figure out what you're attacking onto that. Like, for example, the Vortox is, here is a misinformation piece, but then also here's a separate different win condition if people don't respect it. And that's kind of, build a demon is like each night kill something, misinformation piece, character mix piece, or something like that. But let's go through the list. The first one is I Cut You Choose. You want to guess which demon that is, real quick? That is the Al Hadikia. That's right, good guess. Then we have Jumper, which is the Imp and the Fangu. We have Misinformation, which is the Nodashi. We have the Character Mix. I guess there's a few you could kind of argue is this, but maybe Lou Monster is the best one because you would argue that there isn't a demon, they're a minion instead. That's Character Mix, and you can move around. So the minion holding the demon is technically like not a different player, but like the different minion ability is holding the demon. Moving on. Proxy is the leech. So the person you have to kill is not the demon, is another different player. You could argue that an atheist effect is kind of like this as well, where it's proxying the storyteller instead of a demon. Noise. I would say the Vortox is noise. I would say the Leviathan is noise. You always know it's a Leviathan in play. But yeah, the Vortox creating all that misinformation makes much more narrative spent to try and solve the game. And then multi-kill, which is like your Shab, your Poe, and stuff like that. Yagababble. I would argue Yagababble is also a noise character, but perhaps in the opposite way that you think. The Yagababble is a noise character in that people have to listen very, very closely to everything, and they're paying more attention to what is being said than what is meant. Looking for the same thing being said multiple times, regardless of whether it's the phrase or not. And so, like, I think designing for demons is a lot harder. Some of the ones that I've done in the past are about creating a different kill pattern. I had a pair of demons for the the Tarot script, where they had two different conditions that could be met. And so it was a pair of demons, and each of them had a condition that could be met, which would turn them into the other, right? And so it could have just been one character that just changed its ability, but having it be two different characters lets other things interact with it better. It's a bit easier to understand. And like one of them was like you would kill something a certain number of steps from a chosen target, and then like the other one was like if a minion dies, you would change and stuff like this. Like it's like a bit of character mix, a bit of misinformation. It's like all these kind of things together, but like it was rigidly determinable what the demon chose, and then from the distance from that, you could kind of figure out what was going on. Which was interesting. And then like the demon would paint a target on itself and go, okay, now it's time to move, to jump me, or would change what my character is. Which is interesting. Let's look at some, just from the list, let's try and, pick something, talk about some things like proxy. The leech says you must kill this poisoned player instead of me. Little Monster is like a good example for proxy, where it's like, you don't know which of the minions is the demon and it can move. So in theory, every minion that's not holding a little monster is proxy, and you have to kind of execute all of them and just hope that you hit the right one, right? Multi-kill is always really easy, but trying to figure out how that's balanced against the good team. Like you could have something like each night asterisk choose 3 plays, they die. If you were nominated today, you do not wake at night, right? And then a 15-player game, there's going to be 1,000 nominations, and then maybe you'll wake up and kill people. And so it's a bit silly. Not a character I'd recommend, but this is just me spitballing on what a multi-killer character might look like. So the trade-off on normally killing one thing every night is that there is a chance that it might not happen. Like, for example, the Poe has to stop for a night and charge to then multi-kill. That's kind of the vibe I was going with. But then it can still kind of keep that one per night pattern if things are kind of going according to plan. Misinfo is really easy. There's a lot of different ways to generate misinformation. Empire, which is possibly my most successful demon, is basically choose a player. They are mad about something false. If they break madness, they die. And then you win if everybody is mad. And so you're just constantly creating misinformation in the game. The more misinformation, the better. And then eventually you win if people can't solve the game because there's too much misinformation. It's probably pretty easy to create a jumper demon. We had one called I can remember the icon, I can't remember the name, but it was basically if an evil player nominated you, you changed characters, you swapped characters with a minion. So if you were on the block and about to be executed, a minion could, no, maybe it was if you nominated minion or something like that. It could nominate you and then you would swap characters with a minion. So that you could effectively jump out of the way if you thought you were going to get executed. Which I think is a bit silly, and when we did playtest it, it was way too strong. We had a demon that I created, which was all outsiders are marionettes instead, which is kind of character mix, but it's also it's also like a convert evil. It's like a more minion-y kind of effect. It's like a mega Mesenophiles. But it's kind of... Yeah, I think it treaded on Legion's territory a little bit too much. You would kind of always just have to play for the evil team if you're an outsider, regardless of if you were told you were marionette or not, because of the chance that that demon existed. Which is the same way, like if the Vortex is on the script, you don't want to find out that it's in play by not executing on the first day. So there's a lot of things that you have to kind of consider with how people will have to play something, both for its exact character text and what it will do in play versus what it will do not in play. And again, I come back to signature, which is a really good example of that. Regardless of whether signature is in play, it's a good choice to be trying to make executions that stop signature from being able to win the game. Because, you know, if it's put into play later or something else happens, if it just is in the game, then you want to avoid it from winning. So, I don't know, hopefully this helps give you some ideas and maybe, you know, give some light into the process of how I build stuff. Basically, I'm looking at these kind of categories. I'm like, what do I want this kind of demon to do? Sometimes I'll look at an existing character and go, how do I change this that fits a different category? What kind of a job am I trying to, you know, make happen? And try and put some stuff together in that way. Now, if you have any cool homebrew characters that you've been cooking up, let me know in the comments. I would love to have a look and see if there's anything in the design space I haven't considered, if there's any cool stuff in there. If it's incredibly broken and I think it would be unfun, I will let you know. So test me, see if it's actually a good character or not. I'm curious to see what kind of stuff you guys have made, and you're welcome to argue with me in the comments. As always, it's recommended. And then hopefully I'll be able to show off some of the other cool homebrew stuff I've been working on, because I have a new minion that I replaced on the last script that I'm interested to show off to people soon. So stick around for that. Stick around for that. We get to see what the oust does. Maybe guess what the oust does in the comments. I don't know. I'm just engagement farming at this point. I'll see you next time.